you probably all know me by now in the conference. I'm a postdoc at the ULB over in Belgium. And I've been active in science outreach for about 6 years now, mainly doing live streams, also doing science outreach via Twitter. I started a blog at some point, it was too much work, but I've been active in different aspects of science outreach for 6 years now. And joining me hosting this is obviously Katie. So Katie, passing it over to you.
Okay, hello, I'm Katie Mack. I'm based at North Carolina State University, where I'm a professor, and I'm a member of an initiative there called the Leadership in Public Science Cluster, which is a group of faculty who also do public engagement as sort of part of their main job or other aspects of public engaged science. So I'm in a position where this can be part of my work, which is great, and it's not just a sort of extra thing I do on weekends anymore. So the kind of public engagement stuff that I do is mainly social media. So I do a lot on Twitter as Astro Katie, where I have almost 400,000 followers, so a pretty good group there. And I also have recently written a book about the end of the universe for popular audiences, and I do a lot of radio and podcasts and public talks and things like that, and science writing for magazines occasionally or newspapers. So I've had experience in kind of every kind of public engagement other than things involving children. Or I haven't done very much on YouTube. So those are the kind of the things that I don't have a lot of experience on, but happy to talk about any aspect of engaging with the public or the media, and what kind of best practices are.
Yeah, so we're not going to give you like here's a 101 to science outreach. The idea is to just show you what has worked for us, what we found, what we've learned from our experiences doing outreach. There should be a discussion, so feel free to just raise your hand at any point if you want to join the conversation. If you have something to add, if you have a question, feel free to raise your hand or write in the comments. We'll keep an eye on that as well. So I guess we can jump right into the first slide. Of course, the first thing we need to discuss is why we want to do outreach. There's several good reasons, both for us and for the people we're trying to reach. I think there was something very interesting that Katie said yesterday when we were discussing this about the difference in perception of what people think they should be doing outreach for and what the audience actually wants in outreach.
Yeah, so there was a study several years ago about why scientists do public engagement, and the main answers were things like to inform the public, to defend science. There was a sort of us versus them like vibe to how scientists were talking about their engagement. And when you actually study what works for people, it's things like sharing values, or tailoring your message to an audience, or building trust, or things like that. And those were the things that were sort of least prioritized by the scientists. And so I think it's important to realize that just kind of telling people facts is not effective communication. When people don't know something about science, when they are not enthusiastic about something about science, if they're distrustful, it's not because the facts are not available. It's about how you connect with people, how you build relationships with people, how you build trust between science and the public, and whether or not what you're saying is coming through in a way that people can actually understand and accept and be engaged by. And so I think there are a lot of good reasons to do outreach. There are a lot of we need people doing all sorts of different things, and there is definitely a place for just like, I'm going to explain a thing, but there's also a real need for people to just be visible, accessible, share their experiences, be entertaining, engaging, approachable, trustworthy, all of that kind of thing. And so there are definitely reasons to have a variety of different kinds of voices and approaches, and not just sort of throwing facts at people, because that that doesn't work.
Yeah, one thing I've noticed throughout my outreach is that a lot of people have the idea of us and them, us normal people and those crazy, weird, unapproachable scientists. And this is really the first barrier to break down and really to show people that you're just like them. You're a human who just happens to be a scientist, right? And breaking this us versus them mentality. And as Katie said, you create this kind of connection, make it relatable to them. One thing I always ask myself is like, why are people here listening to me instead of watching a documentary where they could have somebody more famous than me explain things to them? And the reason is that they can't interact with the person in the documentary. They can't create that human connection. And this is something we can offer with outreach, is really just showing them like it's not us and them, it's all of us here together, science. I just happen to be somebody who does science, but this is something that we can all share in. And you don't need a background in science to actually enjoy science. And once you can break down this barrier and really reach people, I think this is when they're much more open to listening to facts, to learning, and
Yeah.
to trusting you.
There's a question from Andrea.
Hi. Sorry. Probably more than a question. Is it okay if I add some of my experience here?
Sure.
Okay. So I work in an outreach group in Mexico City. Well, it's actually in Mexico in general now because it's been growing. It's called Astrophysicists in Action. And basically what we do is also social media. So the idea of this group is to make make science available, specifically astrophysics. And the idea of this is also making it informal, but very well documented. So one of the things they're doing is sharing memes or making live videos, observations. And the leaders of this group are 3, but now it's a wider group. So all of us studied together and we contribute in different ways to all these things. So YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, anything that we're thinking of. And we have also some live talks and chats. We have an astro chat every week. So this part of making things available and being close to the audience, I think, is something that has worked very well. All of what we do is in Spanish because this is the audience that we are trying to reach. And we have had such an amazing response, even costume contests and things like that. People are in a very wide range of ages, and it's a very diverse audience. And we have a very, very, very big audience now. I'm not sure of the number, but we have had even marathons when we reach certain amount of followers. We have like a marathon of talks. So it's like 2 days in a row, day and night, and this has been a great experience because it's also making it available in a fun way, and people seem to really like that and react, and they ask questions all the time. So we're a big group and we're able to answer most of the questions that people have, from the most basic to the most new age kind of thing. So this is my experience about thinking of the audience and trying to reach in this way, trying not to be very serious, but with serious information.
Yeah. I mean, that's great. It's great that it's going so well, and it does bring up, an important point of if you're not going to where the audience is, if you're not speaking the language the audience is speaking in both the literal language and the kind of the way of speaking, you're not going to reach them. And if you do make those efforts, you have a much better chance of connecting with people, and then you're able to shift it to more serious science if they're interested in that, or just bring people together into a community who is excited about science. And I think that those are really valuable and important things to do. So thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. It's definitely important, I think, for people to see you as part of their community as well. And what you were saying about doing it in their language, doing it in Spanish, is of course very good, because then you're not just some weird scientist, you're one of them, like you're part of the community. And it does again make it easier to create this connection, make it easier for people to trust you and to kind of listen to what you're saying. And we've spoken a lot about what the audience gets out of it, but we also want to mention what we get out of doing outreach, because there's a lot that we can learn as well. For me personally, it's really, really helped improve my presentation skills. And it's helped me a lot get over my fear of public speaking, because when you suddenly see that you have 25,000 people watching you, it's like, okay, I guess I can do this now, kind of dropped into it. So I think there's a lot of things that outreach has helped me with, but definitely my presentation skills and my fear of public speaking. It's just something that we really gain from doing outreach.
Yeah, and I just want to also put in a plug for outreach as a way to combat imposter syndrome, or that feeling that you get when everybody around you is so smart and accomplished, and you have no idea what you're doing, and you're just making stuff up. You're a total failure, and then you go to a Science in the Pub event, and people don't even know what a galaxy is, and you get to explain that, and they're like, oh, you're so smart, that's amazing. And that's helpful. Like, that's a good sort of antidote to feeling just run down every day by the general tone of academia. So I definitely can encourage it as a way of remembering not only that you love your science, but also that you know a lot about it, because it can be easy to forget that.
Definitely. Nico, you wanted to add something?
Well, I'd maybe ask Diana and Katie, because you have a lot of experience. I did do a lot of outreach, but back in undergrad, and then I stopped because whatever, studies and life. But now, thanks to Diana, of course, now I'm going back in, it seems. The question is, how do you talk about, like, there are things that I find fascinating, but that's usually not what public wants to know. They want to know about space aliens or stuff like that. I'm like, whatever. So is it like morally okay if I steer the story into something that's like super fascinating and currently like very like research that's being done now, like modern? Or should I stick to talking about space aliens?
Deanna, you want to start? I do have a response to this as well. So
yeah, so I was just going to say that from my perspective, I think it's fine to do both. You make sure you answer what they're asking, but if you want to drag it into a topic that you like more, something people respond to a lot is when you're passionate about something. The example. Anytime I do like an outreach event, I have to bring up the CMB. It's like a rule now, an ongoing joke with all of my followers, that I have to bring up the CMB. And sometimes the jumps I make to get there are not necessarily logical, but I know that once I'm on the CMB, my passion will come out. I'm enthusiastic, and people will like that. So of course you should answer what they're asking, but you can feel free to bring it back to what you actually want to talk about, because then people will listen because you're passionate about it. And Katie, curious to hear your insights.
So similarly, people are always going to ask you questions about aliens if you have any connection at all to space. But also, if you are just really, really excited about something, even if that is something that most people taken separately would just say that that's uninteresting, people feel that, and they want to know what the exciting thing is, and they want to share in that excitement. So if I can share my screen just briefly, I want to show you something, and then we can go back to the slides, if that's okay, Ben.
It's space aliens then. I don't know.
It's not space aliens, no. Hold on, let me find. Okay, so this is something I tweeted in 2016. It is a tweet about boiling water, Okay, and it's a 12-second video of water boiling in a pot on my stove. And just a comment about how, you know, that whole watch pot never boils thing is just propaganda to prevent you from enjoying the awesomeness of fluid dynamics. You can barely see the little ripples in this video, but they are there. It's kind of cool. And it's got like 500 retweets, like 1,600 likes. Like people were really excited about just this little video of water boiling, because I was really excited about this little video of water boiling. It's completely ridiculous, right? Like that is fundamentally uninteresting. And yet, because I was excited about it, because I saw some cool physics in it, that people latched onto that. It was one of my sort of most popular tweets that year. So I think that don't underestimate how powerful it is if you find the cool thing and explain the cool thing and show how excited you are about the cool thing. And if that's something to do with, galactic dynamics, or that's something to do with some, measurement of the fine structure constant, or like whatever, like if you are passionate, you can share that with people, even if it is not, aliens and black holes. So
yeah, your passion will be contagious. I think this is actually a nice jumping point into the second slide we had. If you want to bring them back up, Ben, that would be great. Where we were talking, just giving in general advice about what we think are good practices when doing outreach. So the list of outreach do's. And of course, the passion, we didn't actually write it here, we probably should have, but being passionate is definitely something that gets people more interested. But I think something that ties back to what we were saying before about creating this connection is that you need to both know the audience and the platform you're using. If you're using something like Twitter, it's usually designed for 1, 2, maybe 3 tweets. If you want to write a 50 tweet thread, maybe Twitter is not the platform for that, and maybe you want a blog post. So I think of course you can experiment with that, and I have written 20 tweet threads at some point, but it's important to know what the people are coming to this platform for. If you're doing a live streaming, which is my default, people are there for the interaction. If you just start monologuing and ignoring the people in the comments, they're not going to stay, because that's not what they came for. So I think knowing your audience and your platform and meeting them where they are, because the audience will not take the first step towards you. It's up to you to go to them and bring them to where you want them to be. What comes to mind when I say this to me is if somebody has zero knowledge and they ask a question that to you might seem very obvious, you can't assume that they're going to understand your answer unless you take it to that level. So you go to where they are, you go to their level, and then you bring them back to where you want them to be. But you have to do that first step. You can't expect them to make that jump without you helping them.
I just also want to say briefly that when I'm answering a question from somebody who has no background or whatever, if they start out with something that sounds, like they clearly don't know anything about this, and to me it sounds like oh, that's not a great question or whatever. It's useful to assume that the audience is very intelligent and just does not have the information. So you don't ever assume that they can't understand what you're saying. Assume that they just don't know the words, they don't have the background, whatever. But start with the assumption that your audience is smart and they want to understand and they're engaged, and go from that, because uninformed is not the same as unintelligent, and I do see people make that mistake sometimes. So like it's okay. Like in the next slide we have stuff about don'ts, and one of them is like, don't use jargon. I think it's actually okay to use jargon if you define it and if you put it in context, and people want to know the technical term for something if it's useful and interesting, and if it'll help them understand something in the future. Just don't throw it at them without telling them what it means. So that's something I always try and keep in mind. Christoph, you had a question?
Yes, it's more, I guess it's an uncomfortable question, but since we are talking about social media, how do you deal with toxicity that will be, I think, around an issue? So that's
so the toxicity in social media is a long, complicated discussion. And it does get worse when you have a bigger presence, but you also have some time to build up some defenses and so on. I'm at the point now where I have to take certain steps to protect myself, like physically. Like I keep my home address a secret in important ways. My office phone number and location are not on the NC State website. There's stuff like that. But that's because I'm in a position where I have a really big audience, and like I'm much more sort of in the public eye than most people on social media. Even if you don't have any kind of following, occasionally people are going to insult you and swear at you. Maybe once in a while you will get some kind of threatening comment, because there are just people out there who like to do that kind of thing. My best advice for that is to block and report things very, very quickly and liberally, and don't get into long arguments, and don't try to, fight back or anything like that. And just, push that stuff away as much as you can. I don't mean just ignore it, because I think that isn't necessarily helpful, but if you can take steps like blocking and reporting, and if it gets really bad, you might have to escalate it to other authorities or whatever. But I don't think getting into big fights with people online is helpful. And I think a lot of the times that things get really bad is when people are trying to, like, defend themselves and fight back and attack and stuff like that, and that is just a big mess. So my personal view is if somebody's slightly rude or annoying, I just block them, and I don't interact with them ever again. I don't know, Deanna, you do live streaming. I don't do video stuff that much, and so I don't get the kind of stuff that especially sort of female presenting people get on video. That gets real bad and real gross in specific ways. I don't know if you've had to deal with any of that, Deanna, but
Yeah.
that's also a thing that can be encountered.
Yeah, that's also something that does happen. I mean, the idea of block them, especially don't engage, don't give them attention, because most of the time they're doing this because they want your attention. They want to drive you away from what you're trying to talk about. And if you let them, they will derail the conversation, especially in a live. If you give them the time of day, they will absolutely take advantage of it. They won't be satisfied. So I would definitely say ignore, block, and don't let them get to you. There was one live stream I did a couple of years ago, still in my early days, where I just had so many trolls in there in one go. They all came in mass, and they were drowning out all of the nice comments, and they actually got to me so much that I just walked away. I said, sorry, I can't do this today, and left the video and walked away from it. Within 10 minutes, all of the people who were there actually following me and wanting to listen sent me messages like, I'm so sorry you had to go through that. Please come back. Please, we want to listen to you. So I took 10 minutes and then came back. It's like, right, these trolls are not getting me off of this platform today. Everybody came in with so much support. So there is toxicity on social media, but I think you'll find it's a minority. And it's a loud minority, but most people will be super happy that you're taking the time to talk to them. Those positive comments will drown out the bad ones.
And it is possible to some extent to cultivate a positive community in your own online space, however you're using it. So I know I'm sure, Deanna, that you pay a lot of attention to setting sort of community standards and making it clear what's acceptable and what isn't in your live streams. And similarly, like on Twitter, I don't get that many nasty comments from people who are actually, following and engaged and stuff like that, because I don't go out and try and start fights, and I don't say nasty things to people. And if somebody is really rude to me, I'll say something like "Have a nice day" and block them. And that's the sort of tone I try to set. And people do pick up on that, and people do, like every once in a while, somebody who follows me on Twitter will say something you know, creepy or gross or whatever, and I'll say that's not acceptable, and they'll be like, oh, I'm sorry, you know. And so like it is possible sometimes to just sort of set a tone, and that will help a lot as you're building a community, to make sure that community standards are understood, and you know, that people will kind of enforce it amongst themselves to some degree as well. But you know, I mean, I also want to say, like, if this stuff does get to you, if it is hard, like that's, you know, that's okay too. You know, and if you need to, you know, if you're getting a lot of flack for something and you need someone else to take over reading your comments for a while and deal with it, like that's fine. I've had people do that for me before. I've stepped away for a couple of days. Like you know, your own sort of emotional well-being is a priority, and it is okay to be upset by people saying mean things to you. Like that is a natural human response. So just, you know, anticipate that, understand that, but it is, as Diana says, a vast minority of what you're going to get when you talk about these things. And so making an effort to weight the positive comments more than the negative comments, even though that's not what your brain naturally wants to do, is helpful.
Yeah, definitely. And usually when one bad person comes, you'll see the good people try to drown them out as well. Like, no, we don't agree with this person. And it is reassuring, because you get the feeling that you have a community there that has your back. Of course, this community is one you have to build, you have to find. It's not one that will just appear. But once you've reached that level where you're going to encounter more trolls, your community will usually have your back with that.
Yeah.
So we have another bunch of do's here, and like just recommendation things that we think work well when doing outreach. And I think we can actually tie two of them together, which is using analogies, but doing your best to make sure your information is accurate. Sometimes we use analogies because it's easier, it helps us, but sometimes we might take them a bit further. At that point, we might run the risk of becoming inaccurate. You know, once you've built the trust of people, they're going to expect that what you're saying is accurate. You are going to make mistakes, and that's fine, but you have to admit to them and correct yourself when you know you make a mistake. Because if you get into the habit of making mistakes and not addressing them, you're no longer a reliable source of information. And at that point, why should they trust you? Right. So I think it's very important to make sure that what you're saying is as accurate as you can be, but don't worry about making mistakes, because it's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you're trying to build trust within your community, and they're not trusting you to be omniscient. They're trusting you to be honest and to do your best, and to let them know if something goes wrong. And so, you know, it is really important to make a good effort to be accurate and make it clear what your confidence in your statements are. So you're not saying like, this is 100% true, and then tomorrow like, oh, I was wrong about that. No, like if you're not 100% sure, don't say you're 100% sure. And just, you know, sort of everybody loves to hear a certainty, but they really hate to hear a reversal, and they really hate to feel they've been lied to. So you have to balance that to some degree, but I, you know, in general, you really want to err on the side of being as accurate as possible, both about the information and about your own level of confidence in it. We have more questions.
Just before we go to the questions, I wanted to make a follow-up comment there that of course you want to be accurate, and you should never be afraid to say, I don't know. If there's a question that you really don't know the answer to, I don't know is a better answer than making something up on the spot, because you're not supposed to know everything. Saying I don't know is a good course of action. Okay, Aingoan, I think you were first.
Hi, yeah. So one thing I want to ask, like, so I did just regarding the like making mistakes and stuff. So like I think it was my first outreach talk like a few months ago, and basically I had a question from a kid just asked a very like simple question, basically, is the universe spinning? And I said the universe is not spinning, and like and then like, you know, I think they also basically asked how do we know as well. And I couldn't really work out an answer to it, and I just said to myself, like, we would be able to observe. I said, like, we would be able to observe whether the universe is spinning, but I couldn't really think of an answer on the spot, and I couldn't reach out to the person because there was no, like, like contact details or anything. I got told it was like some sort of primary school kid, basically. I think the parent had like messaged it, and yeah, I don't know what you do in those circumstances, like, because yeah, there's just no way of like contacting those people, and that one still like haunts me to this day, like not being able to kind of correct it, because I'm like, that's a kid who I could have given a correct answer to. So yeah, how do you guys kind of, I don't know if that's how go, like you probably didn't have the exact same question, but like, yeah, have you ever had that kind of where you can't reach back to the audience that you've just talked to?
Yeah, I mean, it's inevitable that you're sometimes gonna mess up, and maybe it's gonna be difficult to correct it. You just kind of have to accept that, and as you're kind of building your reputation, building an audience or whatever, like it's gonna happen more during the beginning, and you're gonna get sort of more practice at how to deal with unexpected questions and so on. And I wouldn't fret about it too much. There are very, very famous and prominent science communicators who just say absolutely wrong things, and and I wish they wouldn't, but they do sometimes. They don't seem to feel any compunction about that at all. So it's once in a while something like that's going to happen, and you kind of have to just roll with it. But generally speaking, if you get a question where you know what the answer is, but you don't know why you know what the answer is, then it's kind of a useful thing to say, like, well, I'm sure that we would know that the universe was spinning if it were, but I'm not sure exactly how. I can look into that. If you want to contact me later, I can try and give you a more clear answer. So you can always do stuff like that and just say, like, that's a great question. I don't have it off the top of my head, but it's great that you're thinking about this stuff, whatever. There are always ways to kind of like push something off to the side. And it's okay to not have every detail of those kinds of things at hand.
Yeah, I don't think I have anything to add to that. That was the perfect answer to that, I think. Okay, Nico, you wanted to add something?
More to ask. Now, I am really afraid I'm going to sound like I'm not going to say the word, but you can extrapolate. But I've seen a lot of people do outreach today, and now I don't know if it's me being judgmental or but not a lot of it is good, in my opinion. And I appreciate the effort. That's like super cool, but a lot of it is very trivial. So how do we communicate this in more depth? Because it's one thing is just shooting trivial random facts from you can find on Wikipedia. And then on the other hand, I don't want people to, they do not have to, derive the equations and go through this what researchers do, right? But somewhere in the middle, go a little bit more deep. So how do we deal with that? Because I have an idea what I want to do. I don't want to overwhelm people, but I don't want to just say like, this is like 200 gigaparsecs. And then like, what do you do with this information? I don't make Katie is like nodding. So yeah, I hope I'm asking the right questions.
Yeah. So I think I assume you're talking about things like those sciencey Instagram accounts where they'll like show a picture of a globular cluster and say this has 100 million stars, and everybody's like, ooh, or something like that. Like those kinds of things. I mean, somewhere along the line, people figured out that you can get a lot of engagement by putting a pretty space picture up and saying, a mind-bending space thing next to it, and that's just, that stuff is out there. A lot of it's wrong, which is really frustrating, but I think all we can really do is, there's going to be, we have to have lots of different voices doing things at lots of different levels, and there's going to be people who are doing the super technical stuff. There's going to be people who are doing really base level stuff, and there's room for everything in between. I mean, I could name a bunch of science communicators who lie along a sort of axis of technicalness, and it's great that that range exists. So I would, I find it really hard to ignore it when I see bad science communication, but I think that for the most part, you just got to kind of do your own thing, do it well, and trust that the audience who wants that will find you if you reach out to them and if you make an effort.
Yeah, but
And
just to
you can
follow up,
also
sorry, is it okay
go
to
ahead, Nico.
like point out to people, like not publicly, absolutely not, but like privately approaches, like maybe like, can you do it maybe this? Have you ever thought about doing it this way? Or not shaming people that I'm completely against. Like, is it our place? Because it is still, I don't know. Maybe it's not my place to do.
I mean,
I don't think
go ahead.
it's productive, right? Because everybody puts out the media that they want. If somebody tells me how I should be writing my tweets, I'm going to tell them to go away because it's my Twitter stream and I'll cultivate it how I like. So I don't think you'll meet any friends trying to change people's approach. I'm also not such a big fan of calling out people unless they're super well-known people who are making obvious mistakes. But if an Instagrammer is putting up a cool space picture and just giving a soundbite fact that might not necessarily translate to anything, you can use that as a springboard. You don't need to mention them by name. Like, oh, I saw somebody show this cool image online, or I stumbled across this online. Let's elaborate on this. And you can use that as a starting point to guide them more in depth. So I don't think you should try to change how they do it because you won't have much success with that. Katie, do you want to add something?
No, yeah, I mean, I agree. I do occasionally say something in a comment, on a really popular Instagram post or something, or I'll reach out to people I know who, if they get something wrong, I'll say, hey, by the way, this isn't accurate. But yeah, I mean, every 6 months somebody will put up a dark nebula and say that it's this giant void in space, and they'll and this happens. It's the same picture, it's the same like claim, it's always wrong. Every once in a while I'll post a little thing about, by the way, if you see a picture like this, it's not a giant void in space, it's a dark nebula. I don't know if that actually helps or not. But that's the kind of thing that I'll occasionally do, but I will generally like separate it from the person who posted it and just say, like, this is a claim, that claim is not correct, here's the real science, just in case you were wondering. And unless it's really popular, really like getting out there, I tend not to engage directly with those kinds of things. So I don't know. It's a matter of sort of your investment. Debunking is tempting. It generally doesn't work very well, and it generally isn't appealing to people that much. I don't find it fun, so I don't do a lot of it. Sometimes it's helpful, but yeah, I don't know. It's fraught.
Yeah, it's definitely tough.
Yeah, Philip, you have a question?
Philip.
Yes, a related comment, but not concerning so much the level or right or wrong, but there are a few very visible outreach people on social media who don't necessarily represent the consensus in the field. And I often get the impression that people get a sort of distorted view of what the state of the field is and what consensus is, because these people tend to push their own agenda. And I mean, some are open about it and say, well, I'm right and everybody else is a jerk. But most of them sort of just present their own, let's say, opinion, which is somewhere on a spectrum. And it's not necessarily the consensus, but many of the readers get the impression that because they read it on this blog, that must be right. And then get the opposite impression that, serious scientists who have a different opinion or some sort of cranks or something. Have you ever run into that? Or have you ever given a talk and someone said, well, I read on so-and-so's blog that it's, different? And
yes.
Won't mention any names.
Yeah. Okay. So there are a couple of names in particular that I'm specifically not mentioning. I think that's really hard, and I don't know a good solution to that. It's something I've struggled with a lot in the last 6 months or so, because certain very prominent people have been pushing things that are very much not the mainstream, and also kind of putting down anybody who disagrees. And that's it's just a super hard thing to deal with, because if it, you know, they've set it up where if you point out that they're wrong, you're part of the group trying to suppress them, and you're trying to attack them, and that's a very effective strategy if that's the kind of thing you want to push. So I don't know a good solution other than to just, you know, every once in a while I'll talk on Twitter about what it means to have a scientific consensus, how we get to scientific consensus. I will try and present our best understanding of the science, and I you know, and not directly attack or debunk individuals, but just like separately say, like, look, this is what we think we know, this is why we think we know it, this is why most of the community believes this, you know. And that, I think that's the best we can do. I think it's I don't think debates are particularly effective. I don't think that getting in big fights about stuff online is particularly effective. And you know, you kind of, I do think that over time, people who are listening to a range of voices in the community will start to see the patterns of, you know, well, this person said that and everybody else is kind of quietly cringing and saying something else. Like, people do get the idea after a while. But I think that one of the reasons I find big prominent voices pushing their own agenda so troubling is because I do think that it can degrade trust in science, and make it harder for people to engage with science, and I think that's tragic and harmful, and I don't know how to fix it.
I think it's okay if they're open about it and they say, you know, this is a minority opinion, but, you know, take it or leave it, which is a bit different than sort of giving the impression that what you're describing is the consensus and everyone else is off base.
Yeah, but sometimes they present it as, this is the minority opinion because everybody else is trying to suppress me. And
yeah, that's wrong.
And depending on how authoritative they come across, that can be even more harmful, because then it presents science as being a committee of you know, doubters. And anyway,
yeah,
that's a hard topic.
I want to add a point there, that one thing I do, I will not engage with these people. I'm not going to take on a science outreach person who is super well known, because it's a losing battle. But something that I try to remind people is to check if there's perhaps a hidden motive behind some things.
Pardon?
Like, if a certain science communicator, a hidden motive. So if a certain science communicator starts pushing an idea that is not mainstream, and then the next week they come out with a book on that exact topic, you might start to think, okay, there's a connection here. They're pushing this idea to increase their book sales. And just reminding people to perhaps look out for this. And if you see somebody pushing an idea that is not mainstream and then pushing their book on the topic, perhaps take it back and ask, you know, are they just trying to get me to buy their book? Are they just doing advertising? And I think it's useful sometimes to just remind people of this. And I asked Ben to bring up this slide because of the last point we have here about soundbite science. And this is what a lot of big science communicators try to do sometimes, is just have the new soundbite, the like 30-second clip that people are going to share, that's going to boost their popularity. You often can condense things into these 30 seconds, right? And this is why I wanted to just highlight here this idea that soundbite science, where you break it down into a catchy phrase that people remember, you often lose a lot of the point there. And a lot of these big people tend to do this sometimes. So yeah, it's a very difficult topic. I don't have the clear answer, but just reminding people to really question if there's a hidden agenda behind what they're hearing.
With relation to the last point, Feynman famously told a journalist, if he could explain his work in 2 minutes, it wouldn't be worth the Nobel Prize.
Yeah. I mean, you obviously need to be able to have a take-home message, but it shouldn't be a soundbite catchy tune that people are going to just repeat blindly without really appreciating, I think. Andrea, I think you wanted to add something here.
Yeah, it's in the same subject, but probably more of a doubt or asking for advice. Hoping it's the right place to say so. So I'm in a outside my science work, I work on personal stuff. So one of those is meditation and reading mythology and so on. So the people with whom I share this tend to be very new age, spiritual kind of things where, you know, it's very common to say things like quantum healing and quantum macrocosmos and some kinds of things. So some of these people look after me or kind of reach out so that I explain them what is the true thing behind the we all vibrate high and we're made of energy. And I mean, yeah, but you know, like do you have any advice on how to address these people who really want to know what's behind the terms and they say, I love science, I just don't know more than high school, or maybe even not getting up to there, but middle school physics, but they really want to know because they're motivated by their spiritual work or something like that. So it's, of course, you have to be respectful because they have some beliefs, but you also kind of have to tell them that people who tell you about quantum healing are are you know not respecting you. Like they're just want your money based on stuff that they don't know about.
Yeah, I can speak about this a little bit.
Thanks.
That it is one of the really hard things. What I try and do when I see stuff like that is to make it clear that having a belief or getting excited about something is not wrong, right? If you are being manipulated by an organization that wants to sell you a quantum vibrations bracelet, it's not your fault for thinking that sounds exciting, right? It's not your fault for trying to live a healthier life or whatever it is that these things are selling. There are people who are actively trying to manipulate the public, trying to play on insecurities and fears and health worries and stuff like that. And those people are, I think, awful. And I get really mad at the people who are selling. I really try not to get mad at the people who are buying because there are lots of ways that advertising and organizations are trying to manipulate people. So I mean, I think what I try and do if people ask me about this stuff is I say, look, it's a lot of people have different spiritual beliefs. A lot of people have different approaches to faith or to their feelings about higher powers or whatever. And I can't speak to that because that's a totally different method. That's a totally different way of viewing the world. It's a totally different set of evidence. Like it's a different way of evaluating claims and feelings and so on. What I can talk about is the physical mechanisms, and I can say that there are experiments that show that these things are not effective. There are, there is no physical mechanism by which the relative positions of Mercury and Mars are going to affect how your life goes in the next 5 days. That's just not something that science can give us. And if you still find it meaningful personally, I have nothing to say about that. What I can say is that this is how we as scientists evaluate those things. This is how we have shown that effect doesn't exist, and there's no mechanism for it. But if there's a spiritual connection that you have, if this is something that is meaningful to your life, I have nothing to say about that because that is not my realm. That is not my where I work. So somebody asked in the chat if magnetic quantum bracelets really are a thing, and yeah, people do sell that kind of stuff. I mean, there's people sell every possible thing, throwing the word quantum on it, or vibrations, or magnets, or whatever. That, you know, you do see that anyway. But yeah, so I try and separate. I try and just say, like, I can speak to the reality of what is actually happening in the world, and how physics connects these things. I cannot speak to what it might personally mean to you as a person, and I have no basis for judgment or you know, advice on that. So that's how I approach that stuff.
Thank you so much.
So I just want to mention that we are coming up to 1 hour, and there is a Gaussian process application session taking place in a few minutes, or if people want to jump over to that. This session is being recorded. You can watch the recording, and we've already shared the slides. Ingoran, I think you want to make a comment, and I guess you'll be leaving us soon. So do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, so I was just going to say, yeah, no, that's a really good point regarding like more pseudoscience stuff that Katie made. But I think like it's a really nice, so that you can take it like as a really nice avenue to explain how cool science really is. Like, yeah, astrology and stuff, like, yeah, we've shown that in science we've proven that these things don't correlate, like the position, star position and stuff don't correlate to what you're going to be as a person and stuff. But it does give us the opportunity to kind of go like, but there are really cool, fascinating things about stars and stuff that we don't know yet, and kind of like use it as a way for them to get fascinated about the real science, the like a better phrasing, I guess. And yeah, and I think, yeah, like when it comes to religion and science, there's so many famous scientists who like Einstein, Rubin, even Hawking in A Brief History of Time, this, I don't know, like he acknowledged the presence of a god. Like I don't think you necessarily have to kind of squash somebody's opinions on more spiritual level to you know, inform them about the scientific basis. And yeah, the thing that I wanted to actually ask was basically so Diana and Katie, you obviously both have like quite a lot of experience, and you're senior to me. Like I'm obviously somebody who's very interested in communicating with the public, and because I think that's a very important aspect of science, is that we're pushing humanity's knowledge forward. But I do find that a lot of my peers are not really as invested in it, and I do feel like this kind of maybe like leaves me up behind, especially amongst like my kind of like area of physics. I think like theoretical physics seems to be a lot more like people seem to fit a certain kind of mold in terms of how they spend their time. And yeah, I was just wondering like how you kind of deal with that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough one, right? There are still a lot of people, unfortunately, who think that if you're doing outreach, you're not doing research, and therefore you're wasting your time. And I've encountered lots of people like this. My response to them is, you know, I'm going to do it anyway. So if you don't want me doing it on company time, I'll do it in my own time, but I'm not going to stop. And I have noticed this is actually a debate online. I know a few people, there was a pretty well-known science communicator recently speculating if his reach and outreach and all of the stuff he does is getting in the way of getting a tenure track position, because people see that he's wasting time on doing outreach. But I want to spin that around and say that now gradually people are looking for this more and more. So I recently went through postdoc applications, and there was more than one that had the comment of experience and outreach is appreciated. And I think we're seeing a shift where more people are becoming aware that this is something that we should be doing. Funding agencies like this, if they can put you out in front of a public and win them some donations, you know, this is something people like. So I think old generation perhaps are more inclined to say, no, this is not something we need to do. But I do think it's gradually changing. And I would say if you want to do outreach, do it anyway. You don't need your supervisor's permission. You don't need the professors at your institute to agree. If you want to do it anyway, and you'll have fun in it.
Yeah, I think that things are changing. I think it is still pretty slow. My experience is that administrators love scientists who do outreach, and like hiring and tenure committees don't always because they're just a different set of people. Hiring and tenure committees tend to be, older professors who, had a certain way of doing things and see this outreach stuff as a bit of a waste. So it varies a lot. There are not very many positions where you can trade off a certain number of publications for a certain amount of outreach. There are a lot of places where if you have the same number of papers as the other applicant, but you also do outreach, that's a plus. But and that wasn't always the case. Now it is. There are very few places where if you have 5 fewer papers than the other candidate, but you're doing huge things on TikTok, you're going to have an advantage. Like, so it's that I think it's things are slowly changing. People are seeing the value of outreach more. Universities certainly are seeing the power of it and the value of it. Hiring committees and tenure committees are still, I think, struggling with that, and I think that might change. And it's also interesting because people don't think that you're not serious if your hobby is like running marathons, but they do think you're not serious if your hobby is explaining science to the public. I mean, there's a bit of a sort of double standard there that that I think is quite frustrating. Even if those two hobbies take the same amount of time. So anyway, I could go on about that. I won't, but I do think it is getting better. I don't think it's where it should be. But there are, again, certain things like NSF does appreciate engagement and does factor that into grant applications to some degree and stuff like that. So there are places where it can help, and yeah, and I think it's fine that not everybody does it. I think not everybody is good at it. Not everybody should be out there in front of the public. But if you do enjoy it, if it is something that is valuable to you, I think it's more and more common that it's something that can be compatible with an academic career.
Agne, I think you wanted to add something.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say, obviously, I don't know the exact situation, but I think sometimes also you might be underestimating people. Like when I came to my current institute, I also thought that there wasn't really an outreach culture here, or it was more kind of performative, that people didn't really care, just did it for the paper that we have an outreach activity. But then when I started organizing outreach events, actually there was a lot of interest. And I think, well, we had a mix of people who had done some outreach or had some experience, but also some of the researchers that we had were completely new to or relatively new to it. And it seemed like it was a really enjoyable experience for them as well. And I think by creating outreach opportunities, you can also build the culture in your community as well. And people might see that they actually enjoy it and it's actually really rewarding.
Yeah, I just want to add to that the very nice example I had during my master's and PhD in Aachen at the Institute for Theoretical Particle Physics and Cosmology, institute with ridiculously long name. When I joined, there was no outreach. And I started this live stream, and I was basically insisting every day, like, who's joining? Who's joining? Who's joining? And, I got over 25 people to join. I got a couple of professors involved. It became a thing that Aachen was known for its outreach group. So just because there's no outreach there doesn't mean you can't start it. Of course, I've also had the opposite experience in a different group where, despite my best efforts, it didn't take off. So it really depends on your group. But yeah, I definitely agree with the idea of try, and maybe you'll find some volunteers. And if you ask enough times, people end up agreeing. That's how I've got most of you to participate in the live streams these weeks. Ask enough times, people say yes. Okay, Christoph, you want to add something?
Yes, just a story of how one outreach group was kind of started. So when I was working at ISO in Chile, there's lots of outreach, but by outreach professionals. And I was a PhD student there, and officially there was not really anything to do for PhD students as outreach. But it was one evening we decided to do in the courtyard, just with us, training each other how to basically learn objects on the southern hemisphere, because most of us were from the northern hemisphere and we had little experience. So we had one outreach telescope there we could borrow because we asked around. And in this fateful evening, we were not really aware of it when we planned this. There was a meeting going on with a big delegation from Germany and France, who were main funding partners, with diplomats, members of parliament, and coming on in. And during the coffee break, they went, of course, outside where we were standing around at the telescope, and all those important people came to us and were really fascinated when we tried to explain, yeah, okay, you see this here, and they have also not seen the southern sky at that time. And even also the sky was very poor because it was in Santiago, bright city, but still you could see some things, and yeah, tell them, oh yeah, Orion is stands on top if you look and things. So sometimes that was a very encouraging story, and so then the institute was much more in support of basically student outreach projects.
That's a really nice story. I think it's something that if you have a telescope and you're an astronomer, if you just go out somewhere public and put your telescope pointing at something, you will get curious people stopping by, like, you just see them looking at you. It's like, hey, I'm looking at Jupiter. Do you want to see? And most people will be like, oh my God, I've never had this chance. Let's do this now. And if you can catch people like that, it's amazing. And honestly, if you get to share the experience of somebody looking through a telescope for the first time and you know that you helped with that, it's an amazing experience. So absolutely, these accidental outreach things are a great way to go. So in the sake of time, because I do have to leave soon, mainly because I want to eat before the live stream, maybe we can go to the last slide where we wanted to discuss different types of outreach. And we're focusing here on outreach online because a lot of people have the idea that outreach is going to a school and speaking to kids. And I think outreach has come a long way. Of course, speaking to kids is important, but there's so much more we can do. And we wanted to focus on the type of things we can do in the age of everything being online and kind of cosmology from home, so outreach from home. And we just listed some different ones that we found that work. Now, in no particular order, I want to highlight live streaming just because it's the one I'm the most used to. With live streaming, you really get the chance to connect with people. People come in live and you can discuss with them. And to me, it's a format that I found where the trade-off of time you need to invest in preparing versus reward is very good. It doesn't really require much time. People who have joined us this week on the streams know that you basically, unless you're hosting and organizing, you just turn up for it. And it's an immediate payoff because you reach a lot of people. You can really see the immediate reactions, and people ask questions, and you feel like you've immediately established this connection. Now, I do a live stream every week that is 1 hour. Most weeks is like 15-minute preparation, which is a good trade-off for me. Now, of course, some weeks there's like a new topic that I want to discuss, and then I'll spend hours researching it to make sure that I'm being accurate. But I think live streaming is a place where the effort involved is definitely worth the reward you get, and people are extremely engaged with it.
Yeah, I haven't done a whole lot of live streaming, but I've definitely, I can definitely see how it's useful. I think really the only challenge is building up an audience, but if you are able to find a platform that works for you and you just show up regularly, I think that's one of the things that's really important about that kind of engagement is it has to be on a schedule. You have to do it at a regular kind of pace, or else people will wander off and forget about you. So if you're able to carve out the same hour every week, you can definitely build up an audience and definitely get that big engagement. I do most of my outreach as kind of plain text. So I do a lot of science writing. I do a lot of stuff on Twitter. I find that Twitter is very good because you can just fire off something without much preparation. You can do, you can write a thread with a whole bunch of information if you want, or link to a source somewhere else, or put in an image, or just like fire out some kind of facts or questions or whatever. And it's kind of however much you want to put in at the moment. And it doesn't have to be regular. It doesn't have to be a specific format. So I find that very useful. It can get kind of toxic on Twitter sometimes, and it can take a while to build up an audience. So there's a trade-off on there, but I find Twitter to be the least effort platform for me, which is why I spend most of my time on that. But there are a lot of, I just started doing some stuff on TikTok that can be fun too. You can get interesting kind of engagement on TikTok as well. So those kind of really short, brief, like just put something out there and walk away kinds of things I find can be helpful. But yeah, I mean, I guess I think that, we can talk about any of these, but I think that the main thing is if there's something that if there's a way you really enjoy engaging with people, if there's something that's accessible and easy for you to do, then, and especially if you have a particular perspective or method or, something that you're bringing to the table that you're passionate about, that isn't sort of just the usual stuff, like that's where you can really make a difference. I mean, if you're a musician and you love writing songs about space or whatever, like go for it, like, or if you do art and you like making beautiful paintings of nebulae and talking about that, like go for that. Like whatever it is that's the thing that gets you excited, that is unique or you're especially good at, that's like, don't try and fit your kind of engagement into a particular mold of how you think it should look, because it's really about what's going to be using your own strengths and your own passion to make the biggest impact.
Yeah, I think that's a great advice, that you don't have to do live streaming because I'm doing it. You don't have to be on Twitter because it's what Katie is doing. You have to find what works for you and what you're comfortable with. I love live streaming. I'm not so great at Twitter. That's okay. I want nothing to do with TikTok. That's just I feel like I'm way too old for TikTok. I know I'm not that old, but it's just like TikTok is just a completely foreign concept to me. My engagement with TikTok is when people send me TikToks, and that's it. But if it works for you, that's the main thing. It's just finding the place where you feel that you can be comfortable to do your outreach, to connect with people, and to have fun and be yourself with it. Agne, you wanted to add something?
Not really to add, actually to ask a question about, so I wonder if it makes sense to change formats temporarily, perhaps. So for us, the thing I started doing here was astronomy on tap. But unfortunately, after 2 events, Corona started. And then there was a lot of talk about moving it online. But I don't know, I felt that it was a lot of work to organize these events, and we were only just building our audience. And I wasn't sure that people would engage in this format, like unless they already, like we didn't have people who were regulars because we had only had 2 events. So it seemed like a lot of effort for potentially very little reward. And I don't know if I'm just being cynical or if it really doesn't make much sense to change formats if you just started.
No, I mean, I think you do what works for you in the moment. Do what you think you can get engagement with. I do things on a lot of different platforms in a lot of different ways, and my focus will shift from time to time based on my circumstances or what's going on, and like that's fine. If you don't think that people are going to show up to the live stream because or to the online astronomy on tap because you didn't have an audience yet, then yeah, it totally makes sense to switch and do something else for a while. So I think you really got to kind of tailor your effort to the circumstances, to your preferences, to the audience 100%. Like, so yeah, don't be afraid to shift away from something that isn't working, because if you're putting a lot of effort in and not getting anything out of it, then it's just going to make you frustrated. So don't do that.
Makes sense.
I think there's one perhaps final comment that we could address, which a lot of you might be wondering of: how do I get started and how do I build an audience? Like, how do I get that connection? So I can give advice on building an audience in live streaming platforms, and my advice there would be to engage with the community. And I think this is true for other platforms as well, like YouTube. If there's already established science communicators on the platform, engage with them. The one example I want to give, I use a platform called HAPS. It's a really nice platform. It has an amazing community, but there is a very strong sense of community there. And every week the HAPS team put on scheduled shows where whether it's broadcast of the week or just come and ask the HAPS creators any questions. Even if you don't have questions for anybody, you can go in there and chat with everybody else. And that's how people on the platform see your name. It's like, oh, Diana appeared in these 3 broadcasts chatting with people. Maybe I should go check her out. So in terms of live streaming, I would say very much engage with the whole community. Even if they're broadcasting about topics you're not so interested in, engage with them, because then they'll bring people to your broadcast as well. And really see it as a community effort. And you're not there just to stand out, you're there so that everyone can stand out together. That would be my advice for live streaming. I'd love to hear your advice for Twitter, Katie.
I mean, it's very similar. Interacting with people on Twitter is the best way to build an audience on Twitter. So, if there are people who are saying things that you really appreciate, you can comment, you can like and retweet and stuff like that. And I see there are a lot of people who I recognize from Twitter just because they comment a lot and they have useful things or interesting things to say. And so I appreciate that. And I get to know them through that. And sometimes I'll start following them or I'll start promoting their stuff. So yeah, just like, see it as a community. You've walked into a cocktail party and you're late, but there's discussions going on. You can join those discussions. You're not going to be sort of immediately thrust onto stage, but if you hang around and you listen and you contribute when you can, people are going to get to know you, and you're going to be part of that community. So.
Yeah, I think for every platform we could offer different advice, but the main thing is just connect both with the audience and with other people, other creators on the same platforms, and it will help you build. So I think we're ready to wrap up now. We've been going for an hour and 20 minutes, and I do need to get food before the live stream in 40 minutes. If anybody doesn't know the live streams yet, we've been doing recaps and Ask Me Anything over on HAPS and on YouTube, where a bunch of people from the conference are just turning up to talk about the conference or answer questions. Today we have an Ask Me Anything. There's still room if anybody last minute wants to jump in and join us. And tomorrow we will have another recap meeting. If you want to test out some outreach, you've never done it before, no experience needed, let us know and we can add you into the recap tomorrow. So on my side, at least, I am always open to discuss outreach. If anyone has any questions, feel free to message me. Message me on Slack, it's probably easiest, or on Twitter. My Twitter messages are open to everybody. Sometimes I regret that, but most of the time it's okay. So if you have any more questions, just feel free to reach out.
Yeah, and similarly, if you want to message me through Slack, I'm happy to chat. So my Twitter messages are not open; they're very, very closed. But
understandable with your fault.
Yeah, but Slack, I'm happy to chat. So thanks everybody for coming and for your comments and questions. This was really good to hear what everybody's experiences are, and I hope this was useful. And yeah, let us know if you have other questions or comments.
Yeah, thanks everyone. And thanks, Katie, for sharing your experience with us.
Yeah, thank you, Deanna.